Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the largest countries in Eastern Europe, with an area of approximately 603,000 square kilometers. Its population was over 44 million before the war. However, this number has decreased significantly in recent years due to war, migration, and destruction. Its capital, Kyiv, is also the historical and cultural heart of the country. Ukraine is a region that has been under the rule of various empires for centuries. The Polish, Ottoman, and Russian empires have left their mark on these lands. This has caused Ukraine to shape its national identity in a constant struggle. During the Soviet Union, Ukraine was one of the most important republics. It was the backbone of the Soviet economy in terms of agriculture, industry, and population. However, the Holodomor, the Great Famine that occurred during this period, remained a deep trauma in the memory of the Ukrainian people. This period, when millions of people died of starvation between 1932 and 1933, was, according to many historians, an artificially created disaster. The Soviet government used this famine as a tool of political repression. For Ukraine, this was not only an economic crisis, but also an attempt to erase its identity. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence. This was a great hope and beginning for the people. However, economic difficulties, political instability, and the shadow of Russia did not make independence easy. Ukraine began to search for a new direction as a country caught between the West and the East. On one side were the European Union and NATO, and on the other side was Russia, with whom it had historical ties. This search for balance caused constant turmoil in domestic politics. The Orange Revolution of 2004 was the first major mass uprising of the Ukrainian people. Millions of people took to the streets to protest electoral fraud. Pro-Western rhetoric gained strength during this period, but political divisions also deepened. The east of Ukraine is generally pro-Russian, while the west is pro-European. This geographical and cultural divide has been reflected in the country's domestic politics. The issue of identity is not only ethnic, but also a matter of direction. In the early 2010s, relations with Russia began to deteriorate again. In 2014, then-President Yanukovych's refusal to sign an agreement with the European Union led to massive protests that quickly led to the overthrow of the government. In the same year, Russia annexed Crimea. This step was a historic shock for Ukraine. This annexation, which was not accepted in terms of international law, also plunged relations between the West and Russia into crisis. The annexation of Crimea meant not only a political but also an emotional rupture. The Ukrainian people saw this event as a direct attack on their sovereignty. Crimea was both a geopolitical and historical part of Ukraine. After Crimea, conflicts broke out in the Donbas region. Pro-Russian separatists launched armed resistance, and a de facto state of war emerged in the region. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives in this war, and millions were displaced. During this period, Ukraine tried to preserve not only its territory, but also its national unity. The army was restructured, the people were mobilized. Civil society and the media played a strong role in the push towards closer ties with the West. This process further clarified Ukraine's identity. Many who had previously clung to the Soviet past were now turning to European values, but this turn came at a heavy price. And in the midst of all this chaos, Ukraine became the story of a people who wanted to remain independent and chart their own course. Geographically, it was a border country, but historically, it was now a symbol of a stance. Before moving on to the next section, if you watched this video up to this point, thank you guys. If you want to support us a little, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. On the morning of February 24th, 2022, the Ukrainian people woke up to the sound of artillery fire. Russia launched a full-scale invasion from the east, north, and south. Although Putin described this operation as a special military operation, the world evaluated it as an open war. The Russian army tried to advance to Kyiv, but Ukraine showed much stronger resistance than expected. Not only the army, but also civilians volunteered to defend. Teachers, students, and artists who took up arms became symbols of national resistance. President Volodymyr Zelensky attracted attention by not leaving his country since the first days of the war. He quickly emerged as a brave leader in the global media. His words, "I am here. I do not need weapons. I need ammunition," became a symbol. Ukrainian cities suffered great destruction. Civilian settlements in Mariupol, Kharkiv, Bucha, and other regions were bombed. The images of mass graves and executions of civilians, especially in Bucha, horrified the whole world. Millions of Ukrainians were forced to seek refuge in European countries, especially Poland. This was one of the biggest refugee crises in Europe since World War II. Train stations, makeshift camps, and voluntary solidarity networks became their lifeline. The Western world has provided Ukraine with arms, money, and humanitarian aid. The US, UK, and EU countries have sent equipment from long-range missiles to tanks, but direct military intervention has never taken place. Russia, on the other hand, caused the war to become not only a military weapon, but also a weapon of energy and food. It cut off the flow of natural gas to Europe and prevented grain exports. This led to a worldwide energy and food crisis. From the first days of the war, the Ukrainian people organized not only physically, but also digitally. Information wars were waged through Telegram groups, social media campaigns, and the internet. Global public opinion showed overwhelming support for Ukraine. Inside Russia, anti-war protests were quickly suppressed, with thousands detained and the media under control. But many Russian artists, academics, and citizens still spoke out against the war. Ukraine's infrastructure was severely damaged. Power, water, and internet outages lasted for months. Especially in the winter months, people struggled with both cold and bombardment. However, Ukraine has experienced a major transformation in terms of identity during this period. Even many Ukrainians who now speak Russian have begun to abandon their native language and turn to Ukrainian. Language and culture have become a form of resistance. Zelensky's international diplomacy traffic did not slow down. He made speeches on platforms such as the UN, NATO, and the European Parliament. Ukraine's NATO membership was on the agenda again, but no official steps were taken. As the war dragged on, fatigue grew in society, but resistance took root. Although many people lost their lives, those left behind pulled together. This war became not just a struggle for territory, but also a struggle to become a nation. And now the world looks at Ukraine not just as a geography, but as the name of a resistance. This struggle of a small country against a giant power has been written into history. But it is not over, because peace is still far away. The war has shattered not only Ukraine's cities, but also its memory. But amidst this destruction, the will to start over is felt strongly. People are forced to continue their lives not where they left off, but somewhere else. While sirens blare on the streets of Kyiv, people continue to go to work, school, and the market. The effort to normalize is actually a kind of psychological defense mechanism, because life must go on despite all the uncertainty. Educational institutions are trying to keep the system afloat by teaching online or in shelters. Schools may be destroyed, but teachers are still trying to find ways to reach their students. Education is no longer just about distributing knowledge, it's about distributing hope. Ukrainian youth experienced a major transformation during this period. The war completely changed their outlook on the world. A generation emerged that no longer only had career dreams, but also a desire to rebuild their country. Women took an active role in every area of the war. At the front, in the hospital, in the kitchen, in the organization. They were not only supportive, but also direct subjects of the resistance. The place of women in the rebirth of Ukraine became much more visible. While the east of the country is still shrouded in conflict, life is recovering more quickly in the western regions. cities like Lviv have been both crowded with internal migration and are beginning to revive culturally, with new initiatives, workshops, and civic spaces emerging. Agriculture in rural areas has been hit hard. Fields have been mined, irrigation systems have been damaged. But despite everything, villagers continue to work the land, because for them, this land means not only their livelihood, but also their identity. The Ukrainian diaspora also played an important role during the war. Ukrainians abroad organized fundraisers and lobbied. This global solidarity added a new dimension to national unity. Relations with the West have become not only diplomatic, but also strategic. The issue of EU membership has been brought back to the agenda, and Ukraine has been given the status of a candidate country. However, this process will be long and difficult, requiring both political and economic reforms. During the war, Russian-speaking Ukrainians also changed direction. The vast majority now identify as Ukrainians, regardless of their native language. This shared identity may be one of the greatest gains of the war. One of the hardest parts of war is the void left after those who lost their lives. It is not just lives that are lost, it is families, future plans, childhoods. However, this mourning also becomes a silent force that unites the country. Ukrainian art and literature took on a new direction during this period. Works depicting resistance, pain, and hope increased. Music, theater, and visual arts became the voice of Ukraine both domestically and internationally. Throughout the country, the word reconstruction does not only mean physical reconstruction, but also mental reconstruction. Plans are being made for the future, but everyone knows this. It is not possible to go back to the old lives. Zelensky is no longer just a president. He is a symbol in the collective memory of the people. His leadership in the post-war period is full of hope and expectation. But the people's demands will now be higher and more careful. And while Ukraine's future remains uncertain, one thing is clear. The country has learned to protect not just its borders, but also its identity. The reborn Ukraine has become not just a state, but a story of resistance for the world. And while Ukraine's future remains uncertain, one thing is clear. The country has learned to protect not only its borders, but also its identity. The reborn Ukraine has become not just a state, but a story of resistance for the world. If this story impressed you, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. See you later.